everybody here on Sunday morning. Stalin was for a time a dictator, and a dictator is someone who is first among equals, meaning that this person has unquestioned authority, but others around him regard themselves as his collaborators, as his colleagues, or in Stalin's case, comrades. But Stalin transformed his dictatorship into a despotism. A despotism is when the people serving the dictator in the inner circle are slaves. They have no autonomy. Their property and even their lives are at risk at every moment. So this is quite different even from a dictatorship, which is frightening enough.
So if you think of the Great Terror, which you have written about in your recent book, Stalin 1929 to 1941, with the subtitle Waiting for Hitler, how many people were killed as a result of Stalin's system of rule or system of despotism?
Yes, so the numbers are quite substantial. Communism globally killed about 65 million people. 65 million. Stalin, and combined with Lenin, is about 16 to 20 million. Most of those deaths were from starvation, famine, and related disease. This does not include the deaths from war. For example, World War II or the Korean War. It's 65 million without the deaths from war. Mao also put up some very big numbers, as we say in sports, on the death toll. Mao's famines were even bigger than Stalin's. But nonetheless, 16 to 20 million is a pretty big number for Stalin.
And how many were killed by the NKVD and other kind of politicized secret police services?
More than 1 million were executed, that is to say, summarily shot, usually with fabricated charges. The majority of the deaths, as I said, was famine and related disease. Many people were deported to frozen wastes where there was no housing and they were supposed to survive somehow the first winter out there under the open sky. So it's a brutal, horrific system. And of course, it was in the service of ideals to supposedly build a better world.
So to move from the general, the large scale, to the personal scale, Hyun-Soo Lee, you lived as a child, as a young adult, in North Korea, and then you escaped via China to South Korea. And it's a complicated story. But briefly, can you tell an outline of what happened to you?
I was born in North Korea, and for 18 years I was living in there. Until I escaped my country, crossed the border into China, I thought my country was the best in the world. It was a utopia. And then outside of my country, like other countries, America or Japan, Korea, is all like disaster where people are dying there. Because that's what our dictator, they were told us, that the life in North Korea is a utopia. Even though we were grew up watching with constant public executions and people are disappeared in the middle of the night, if one of family members say something wrong things about the government, and then the whole family disappeared, and then they were forcibly sent to the political prison camp. And we grew up in that situation, but we thought the life in North Korea still, that's the paradise, because in the outside, like, people are starving there, people are suffering under the system. That's why there's no comparison. In North Korea, we never learned what's democracy or capitalism, and there's no comparison we could compare with my country, because even until today, it's illegal in North Korea having a passport and get a visa to abroad.
And did you learn about other political systems? Did you hear about Mao in China, or did you hear about Stalin in Russia?
Oh, Stalin and Lenin was kind of, until 1970s, was all best friends for our dictator. And then suddenly from 1970s, somehow the regime completely removed the books from the Stalin or Lenin Marx. They removed all the books and then they burnt in the outside.
And what made you decide, I'm going to try to escape my country?
We had a big famine, which has killed more than from 1 million people to up to 3 million people from mid-1990s to early 2000s. And until then, I thought my life was normal, but seeing people dying on the streets, like one day I was watching a woman lying on the street. She was dying on the street while her emaciated child in her arms staring at her hopelessly, and people were looking at her dying, but nobody helped. That was a reality. So during daytime, I saw dead bodies, a lot of dead bodies on the street. But when I see the China, which was across my country, 10 meters ahead of me, I feel completely two different colors. While I see the darkness in my homeland, I saw the bright new world in China. So I was so confused because in school we even learned that North Korea was superior to China, but I don't see the North Korea is much better than China. That's why in the end, but I didn't mean to escape my country because I couldn't imagine being separated from my family forever because that's everything to me. But to find out the answer about the outside, just I was thinking cross the border and then 1 week later coming back to my country, but crossing the border suddenly completely changed my life.
Shashi Tharoor, can I ask you to put this into an Indian context? Now, I think I'm right in saying you're MP for Thiruvananthapuram, and it's quite usual in the south of India, and indeed in other parts of India, to find people called Stalin or called Lenin. Why is that? Why in India does the name Stalin mean a different thing?
Yeah, it is curious, actually. I do know a couple of Lenins, and we all know one Stalin who's likely to rise in greater political prominence in our country. I think it's partly a reaction to colonialism. It was very interesting hearing Stephen Kotkin talking about the victims of communism, and I think he's totally right. But I'm not sure the numbers are very different for colonialism. I mean, we know in India that British-made famines killed at least 35 million people, a matter of record, and that it was perpetuated by conscious colonial policy. So I think that given the fact that you had this kind of thing going on, that perhaps people in reaction were not prepared to espouse the moderate constitutionalism of the Indian National Congress and so on. They wanted to look for a more radical alternative. And a lot of the illusions about communism that we see, even in the books of Democrats or people raised as Democrats, reads 10 Days That Shook the World, for example, about the Bolshevik Revolution. Or Nehru, his first significant foreign visit with his father was to the Soviet Union. And he came back and wrote a surprisingly laudatory account of it in the late 1920s. You've got, who was it who said, I've seen the future and it is here, you'll know. Lincoln Steffens, the American observer of communism. So you've got example after example which people thought that a wholly different way of ordering political power in society had to be given a chance because we'd seen how awful the other system could be. And I think that was part of it. In the case of M.K. Stalin in Tamil Nadu, I believe it was simply the coincidence he was born the day Stalin died, and so his dad was inspired by the day's newspaper headlines. But at the same time, there is very much the perception that these people stood up against the hated oppressor, whom in our experience was the British.
Can you just say a bit about the term despotism in an Indian context and the fact that in the 19th century there was this idea of enlightened despotism, so people could talk about despots in a different way to how the term would be used today?
Well, yeah, I don't quite go as far as Stephen does, and I'm sure he's done more scholarly work on what despotism is. In the common understanding of despotism, there is a tendency to see it merely as the absence of democracy, as somebody essentially laying down what will happen in society. There were two kinds, in fact, when you say in the 19th century, the phrase was used differently. The first one actually who gave it currency was Marx with his Oriental despotism, which was a complete and profound misunderstanding and misreading of the way in which Eastern societies functioned. And then there was the idea of enlightened despotism, where the British basically said, we will not associate Indians with government because we will rule them in their interests better than they can. That was the notion of enlightened despotism. Now, I've demonstrated in my book that that second idea was completely fraudulent, and that, in fact, there were Indians perfectly capable of doing what the British were not allowing them to do, but there were also very, very much policies at every level, which even when ostensibly designed to promote Indian interests, were unabashedly only there to either advance Britain's rule, enhance British profits, or promote British interests.
But would you draw a distinction between the way that the secret state operated in colonial imperial India as against the way that a figure like Mao or like Stalin operated in terms of executing people in significant numbers?
Absolutely. No, there is no doubt. It's not that the British were innocent of the kinds of crimes that the NKVD committed. They shot people, hanged them, blew them from the mouths of cannons, and transported them off initially to the Straits settlements, then to Malaya, and so on. And then, of course, once slavery was abolished, they sent millions of people out in a disguised slavery called indentured labor. So, I mean, they were not exactly free of any of that, but one major difference between colonial despotism and the despotism Stephen's talking about is the absence of randomness. If you were white, no one was going to do you any harm. You could murder somebody and you'd be let off with 10 days in jail. And there's a detailed study of the way in which the British, in 200 years of British colonial rule, there were only 3 cases when a white man was convicted for murdering an Indian.
Right, but my question was about the secret state and how it operated.
Well, the secret state, so as I said, the randomness is not there. In the case of Stalin, and so you could be his closest advisor yesterday and be sent off to Siberia tomorrow or shot the day after. I mean, so that randomness was not there with the Brits. But the secret state, they did certainly intercept mail, open envelopes, read what was going on. They did follow people. They maintained vast quantities of secret files. Some 70,000 files were burned in a day in Delhi alone, just before the transfer of power to the independent Indian government. So there was a secret state. But whether it was, I mean, I don't think one can effectively compare it to the communist state, because at least it was operating within a trapping, within the formal structures of what was meant to be democratic accountability.
Okay, so I'm going to turn now to Rajdeep Sardesai and India in the 20th century. Again, this term despotism is used quite loosely, but when would you say was the last time that India had a convincing despot in power?
I presume that you want to make no references to what contemporary India now faces.
We
right?
want.
I presume.
That's your choice.
Look,
we have freedom of speech.
do we? Okay.
We don't want to hear from you about Aurangzeb, yeah? Come on.
Now, look, I think if you look at it purely in terms of post-independence India, Patrick, 75 to 77, the period when Mrs. Indira Gandhi imposed emergency in this country and jailed her political opponents, will be seen as the most graphic example of some form of despotism in this country, where democratic institutions were essentially subverted by the Prime Minister of the country. And I think while there weren't the kind of killings that we've heard so graphically about from Stephen, the fact is that that was that one dark period where you could argue conceivably that Indian democracy had been suspended. But look, we are in a city, Patrick, ironically, with this large audience who for the last 50 years in this city has effectively, at times, almost celebrated and voted for someone who was unabashedly a despot. And ask yourself why. Why is it that this otherwise very civilized audience who will probably cheer this and will be probably troubled by what you hear?
Okay, so just to contextualize this, you're talking about the Shiv Sena leader, Bal Thackeray.
Yes, I am.
And you're...
Yes, I am.
But was he really a despot, or did he just have some of the external, superficial trappings?
Look, I think despots in India function at the end of the day within a democratic setup. I mean, I think we have numerous putative despots in this country. Whether it is in West Bengal, where if a cartoon is done against a chief minister, you could be jailed, or a Facebook post could lead to your jailing, or in this city where 25 years ago, this very week, this city was torn apart by violence, where effectively a firman was issued by the so-called Shiv Sena Supremo to essentially teach Muslims a lesson. Where was, so from time to time, I mean, eventually he had to get elected through a democratic setup. 5 years later, in 1995, the Shiv Sena came to power for the first time through a democratic setup. But the instincts, the trappings, the manner in which the leader would dress up, the setup of his political party was entirely designed to create a kind of a culture, a political culture where despotism did exist, if not at the heart of it, then certainly along the margins. And people almost, from time to time, looked up to it with awe, with reverence, with fear. And while there may not have been the killings that we talk about in communist, in Russia, the fact was that people have been eliminated in some form or the other, either through organized riots of the kind that took place 25 years ago, or even in some cases, elimination of your political rivals. We Indians, I think at some time, actually like the idea of being ruled by despotic rulers. We like the idea of having, under the guise of this strong man, under the guise of having a strong leader, sometimes we are more than willing to sort of wink at the possibility that that strong leader may have despotic tendencies. And that's true of Indira Gandhi, it's true of Bal Thackeray, and it's true of the man who now rules this country as well.
So can I ask you, Hyun-Se Lee, when you hear these descriptions of either colonial or post-colonial India, these comparisons to different forms of tyranny, different forms of despotism, how does that coincide with your own experience of actually living in a despotic political system?
After I escaped North Korea, I was really surprised to see people are fighting for animals' rights. Because I couldn't imagine, because the person like me who came from North Korea, like today many people ask me, like in India, last time when I visited here, so many people asked me, how's women's rights in North Korea? So I said, in North Korea, man is much superior to women, but we don't have even men's rights. So where's the women's rights in North Korea? So growing up in that society, we were completely deprived every right from the government, from the regime. We didn't have a freedom of speech, freedom of religious, freedom of movement. We were deprived everything. And because when we move between the cities, we have to get the traffic certificates. And then people only who had money or has power, they could get those tickets easily, but people, on the other hand, people who has no power, they couldn't get that, so couldn't move easily. And then freedom of speech, I can't even imagine today that I am speaking against our dictator publicly, because living in North Korea, I couldn't even dream or imagine even in myself, like I can't call my dictator's name without putting any titles before that. Like we have to say dear leader or General Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, but I'm calling him right now Kim Il-sung or dictator. If I say that in North Korea, I will be just killed in the public execution. And freedom of religious, I never heard of what's God, Jesus in my life. Because in North Korea, our dictator, the founder Kim Il-sung, he was God for me, for every North Koreans. So I thought until when I was 14, he was the guy who didn't even go to the bathroom like humans, like us. And then he's not smoking or drinking alcohol. Because in the textbook from age 4, we were severely brainwashed that he did many superior things that a human being that we can't do. So we believed that. So I mean, there's so many examples how we were just in daily life deprived. For example, in North Korea, in every house, we hang the dictator's pictures on the wall. And whenever I received a gift from my parents, I thought all the good things came from my dear leader and not from my parents. So hugging the gifts and I bought to the pictures on the wall. That's not only me, that's all North Koreans, we believed that he was God. But in 1994, in his funeral, I was so shocked. I thought he would live with us forever. And then I was so confused seeing his funeral. And then the moment, it was a huge realization that maybe he's human like us. So that's how the North Korean people were slowly awakened from that moment.
Stephen Kotkin, can I ask you the same question? What do you make of the comparisons to India, whether colonial India or post-colonial India, with principles of despotism?
In the United States, we have a common colloquial understanding of despotism, and it's synonymous with husband. So I understand the points of comparison. So in the Soviet times, an American and a Soviet were debating about their different systems. And the American said, I can stand right in front of the White House and criticize my president, and nothing will happen to me. And the Soviet says, I can stand right in front of the Kremlin and criticize your president, and nothing will happen to me.
You write it in your book, Stalin, that the key to him becoming the despot, as you refer to him in the later parts of the book, is the fact that he's unconstrained by law or constitutional limits. Is that the key between a political leader who's autocratic in a country like India and somebody under the system that followed 1917 in Russia, in the Soviet Union, the fact that he was unconstrained?
Yes. That's the short answer. The longer answer, you know, there are authoritarian tendencies, and then there are authoritarian systems. Something which is systemic, in other words, which doesn't depend on the whims of an individual, the personality of an individual only, but is instead built into the institutions. Authoritarianism is the absence of constraints on executive power. Some of those constraints could be, for example, not constitutional. The country is large, distances are great, it's difficult to rule from a central point, a very large country. Those are not the kind of constraints, the absence of those constraints that I'm talking about. I'm talking about where if you give an order that somebody should be executed, you don't need any evidence. You don't need to have a trial. You don't need to have any procedures whatsoever. That's what I'm talking about, the absence of constraints. That's what despotism looks like. Once again, there's a colloquial understanding of despotism, and we have political passions, and we employ such terminology. And also, there are authoritarian tendencies that individuals in positions of power can express even in a democratic system. I'm very struck. You know, I'm quite nostalgic for democracy. I was just in the United States the other day. This is only my second day here. And you have a vibrant democracy here. And I ask myself, where did that come from? Where did this vibrant democracy, this doesn't mean that you're satisfied with everything that you have. It doesn't mean you don't have higher aspirations, disappointments in many specific policies or epochs in the country's history, including recent epochs. I understand that. But nonetheless, it's very impressive. This is a democratic country. Even if we have, even if we have, as I said, authoritarian tendencies, I have to say there are a lot of authoritarian tendencies in people, And fortunately, they're constrained in some fashion. Not always, but the constraints are really important. Rule of law, that is to say, an impartial professional judiciary, an impartial professional civil service, a substantial free media that has a business model that enables it to do what it wants, tell the truth. And one could go on down the list of many other, including self-organized society. Look at what we've got right here, this literary festival. Right? This is a self-organized society. These are the kinds of things you do not encounter under despotism.
And of course, in India, people are encouraged rather than discouraged from voting, but the result, the voter turnout is here substantially higher than in many other democracies. Shashi, is this right? Is it that in India, anybody who wants to be a despot is immediately tempered by legalism?
Not just legalism. I think Stephen gave a more comprehensive list than that, and I agree with that list. I think there's a number of checks and balances in our society, but I wouldn't be complacent, Patrick. I must say that though I appreciate all those who applauded when an outside observer came and told us how wonderful we are, we always like to hear that. The truth is that there are things we have to be constantly on our guard about. That old cliche about vigilance being the eternal price of liberty. The truth is that we have rule of law, independent judiciary, independent press, independent institutions, civil society, literary festivals, the argumentative Indian, all of that stuff. But at the same time, all of these things can be suborned. I don't think you'll need an emergency, as Mrs. Gandhi proclaimed from 75 to 77, to undermine each and every one of these institutions. They can be done more insidiously, and that's why we have to be on our guard. You can have editors. You don't have to lock up editors if you can tell their owners that the owners' other businesses would be vulnerable to income tax investigations and God knows what else. You find that editors who enjoy their jobs and their perquisites are going to scurry to ensure they don't cause any unwanted offense that will bring the wrath of the government down on their owners. You find, for example, that when it comes to the judiciary and so on, there are no public demands for a committed judiciary, but when the judiciary, shall we say, is looking for post-retirement appointments, surely the judgments they pass are not irrelevant factors in weighing. Please let me make it very clear for legal reasons that I'm not casting any aspersions on anybody who's a judge today or yesterday. I'm just saying that, that it is impossible for any independent civil servant, independent police officer, independent judge who's looking for post-retirement appointments to be unaware of the consequences of judgments.
But this predates 2014?
I beg your pardon?
Does this predate 2014?
I think it's inherent in every system. It depends on the willingness of those in power to exercise their capacity to misuse that power. I think that, frankly, the lot who were in power before 2014 did not seek to misuse the power in quite the same way as is being worried about today. Look, we can all have individual cases we can talk about, but the very fact that I'm sitting in opposition amongst 46 MPs will tell you that the system functioned democratically as it was meant to, and we have paid, if you like, the price that accountability demands. All I'm saying is that as long as that accountability is there, we needn't worry. I'd like to go back to Stephen's earlier point in his last answer when he talked about systems. If you look at famines, for example, the colonial system was not the communist system. And certainly the colonists themselves had a liberal democracy back at home within which they had a free press and so on they were accountable to. Yet they presided over so many deaths and famines. Why? Amartya Sen has analyzed this very well. Famines don't occur in democracies with a free press. India was a colonial despotism, and what happened essentially was that the suffering and deaths of people didn't matter because they didn't determine the survival of the government.
Let me just pick up that point about a free press and go to Rajdeep. Does India have a free media?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the best way to answer that would be, the short answer would be yes and no. I think it would be unfair to say that we have a media which is not free. Just look at the efflorescence of newspapers, websites, television channels across this country, and contrast it with that of China or Russia today. And in the broader sense, the Indian press is remarkably free. But as they would say, and the cliche would go, we are free but still in chains. Sashi mentioned business owners, and certainly there is reason to believe that the manner in which major newspapers and channels are now owned, the ownership patterns leave a lot to be desired. I think there's nothing that we can be sanguine about. I think we must be very worried about the manner in which the Indian media now finds itself virtually crawling when asked to bend at times. And what I find disturbing is that those who claim to stand for freedom of speech are actually the ones who have been the first to crawl and bend. And I wish the people of India would actually realize what is happening, rather than celebrate those who claim to stand for freedom of speech, but are actually little more than lapdogs of the establishment. I mean, from watchdogs, we've become lapdogs. There is absolutely no doubt. I haven't seen, and particularly the mainstream media. The problem in India is not small media. The problem in India is big media. I know we are speaking from a forum which is in a sense organized by big media, but I think maybe they're part of the problem at times.
But as somebody who has seen the Indian media from all different levels for really a substantial amount of time, is there a significant change in the way that politicians now exert pressure on the media to how it's always happened?
I think there is. I think what has happened is I think politicians' intolerance always, the politician by nature is intolerant because he believes that the Indian politician likes to be surrounded by chamchas and sycophants. He doesn't like to be shown the mirror. The media's job was to show the politician the mirror. Over time, particularly the new generation politicians lack a thick skin. They are easily influenced by what they see on the media, and now they can use business power in particular to control the media in a manner that was perhaps not possible. There was a Chinese wall, or there was certainly some distance between the politician and the journalist. Those lines have got completely blurred in recent times, making it that much easier for the political class to control the media. And I think it really stems from ownership. Once your owner has interests beyond the media, it becomes very easy for the politician then to really, in some way, chain the media person, because you want to build a college, you want to have a power. I mean, we have Indian media owners who are in power, oil and gas, who are in professions that have nothing to do with the media. They are coming into the media. Every major television channel in the Northeast is today owned by politicians. In Punjab, cable is owned by the Akali Dal, so you can't even do a television program and your channel will be switched off if you do it against the Akalis. In Tamil Nadu, cable is owned by the politicians. It's about ownership. Ownership must be liberated of political influence. If it is not, then you will be a banana republic.
So I have a question.
And when I use the word banana republic, I refer to it in the context of channels that claim to represent Republican values and have reduced this country's media to a banana republic.
Okay, so putting the word republic back into another context, I'd like to ask each of the panelists in turn, before we go to audience questions, what does the despot of the future look like? In the age of Trump, or the age of Erdogan, or the age of Putin, the age of social media, the age of fake news, where fake news means different things according to who's using the term. So Trump will talk about accurate, well-reported news and call it fake news because he doesn't like it. So what is the despot of the future going to be like? Hyun-Se Lee, do you want to answer that first?
Especially I'm from Korea right now. Many people worry about the issues on Korean Peninsula between America and North Korea. In the past, many people worry about our dictator Kim Jong-un because he's such unpredictable dictator and young guy, unexperienced. But right now, it's time to not worry about Kim Jong-un, but the Trump. We should worry about Trump more than our dictator because
That's a very strong statement. You really feel that he's more
Yeah.
unstable, more unpredictable, more
Yeah.
like an angry teenage child?
Oh, that's a lot of words you put into her mouth, Patrick.
A lot of words put into somebody's mouth
Moderator.
from Shashi Tharoor, who's been on the Amul adverts with polysyllabic words. I mean, what are you saying, Shashi? Please.
So, our dictator Kim Jong-un, he knows their nuclear power is not the superior in the world. And if he start any propagation, attack America territory, he know that North Korea, all country will be disappeared on this planet. He know that clearly.
What would Kim Jong-un do if there was a conventional military attack by the United States on North Korea? How would he respond?
Oh, then it's a disaster between the whole Korean peninsula. It will be just, I don't want to even imagine that people in South Korea, especially in Seoul, we are 25 million people are living in there, and the economic situation in South Korea is really high. So it will be just North Korea and South Korea will be just finished because North Korea gonna use, because in the DMZ zone, the military zone, the North Korean regime, they already faced the military faced to South Korea. So in case what happened, they're gonna bomb South Korea just immediately in an instant. Okay. So that's why South Korean government really worry about that. But Trump, if he does not care about South Korea, then he gonna do exactly what he want to do. That's why I know when the Trump became the president, I know the answer between North Korea will be completely, maybe very positive, or will be completely disaster. There will be no between the solutions. I knew that. So right now seems we are going to the completely the disaster, that direction. But so we are just hoping Trump just to he do the right decision. So I want to, instead of bombing to North Korea, I want he use other method to solve this problem. The propagation is not, the sanctions, economic sanctions, that also does not work really well. But to convince China always the main key, to convince China to stop the oil gas line that's sending into North Korea, that's the best answer. But America still, Trump couldn't convince Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping seems he didn't want it, willing to do that. So, because they hate America initially.
So, Rajdeep, I know that you have met and interviewed Robert Mugabe, but what does the future despot look like globally?
You know, I interviewed Robert Mugabe some 20 years ago, but it was in the lovely Rashtrapati Bhavan. So I guess the Rashtrapati Bhavan's environment makes even despots look rather, almost like Shashi Tharoor.
Oh, he's an enlightened despot, surely.
He was very soft-spoken, and he's sounded unusually nice. Not the kind of person who'd eliminated or killed thousands of Zimbabweans. But look, I think there will be an increased arbitrariness. There's an increased tendency towards populism, to use television in particular. I think, we are in this soundbite age where the despot can use the power of television to build a certain aura around himself or herself, and seem almost magnetic in her or his appeal. So I think television will play a major role in shaping the future despots. But there'll be an arbitrariness and a surveillance state of the kind that we're already seeing at times in this country, where from birth to death now, every little record of yours will be kept by someone out there. Stephen spoke about the secret state, but who is to know that we aren't moving towards a surveillance state of some form in the future? So I think arbitrariness, where one day your currency is suddenly unacceptable for whatever reason.
Okay, let's keep off the Notebandi for the moment.
Okay.
Just a quick comment from Stephen and from Shashi before we move to audience questions. In a sentence, what is the despot of the future?
No, I'd say the despot of the future is a high-tech despot, and that there's absolutely no question that the point Rajdeep made is the way to go, which is that for a despot, now you don't need overt things like censoring the press and locking up journalists and all of that. That's so 20th century. I mean, that's so passé, right? So what they want to do now is they want to know everything about you, including things you don't want them to know. So the surveillance state, the joke that's going around that the headquarters of Aadhaar should be moved to Linking Road because the Aadhaar now has to be linked to everything, to the PAN card, to the phone, to the... So the result is that the result is that essentially with one number, the government knows who you've spoken to, where you've gone, what you've done, who you've met, what you ate, how much you paid, didn't pay, how much you owe, the works. Now, the result of all of that is if the government wishes to use the information, and that is if you are careful enough not to give them cause to use the information, you'll be left alone. But if you trouble them, they can trouble you back with a sledgehammer. So that's what a despot, I think, will do in future.
Okay, and Stephen, in a sentence?
I'm not that good at predicting the future.
The historian speaks.
I'm a lot better at predicting the past. I'll say only one thing. Democracy is stronger than authoritarianism, provided we know we have the confidence and the will to defend democracy, and that we defend democracy not using authoritarian methods, but that we're true to the values of democracy as we uphold it with all of our strength and will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. Now we have 10 minutes of Q&A with the audience. I request you once again, no opinions, only questions, small ones, and we have 10 minutes, very quickly.
Okay, so we have a questioner in the middle here in the second row. Yeah.
Put on the mic, put on the mic.
The mic isn't on.
Okay, can we bring another mic to the questioner?
Hello?
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Mr. Kotkin, this is for you. A lot of the people with despotic tendencies are people whom we voted for, whom the public have wanted in power. And coming to Rajdeep's point of saying, do we really want these people in power? Do we want despots? Are you seeing this trend? What's your thought?
I think it's very important that we fight better in the public realm and in the electoral process against the kind of people you're talking about. One of the things that was quite striking in the United States was all of the calls during the Republican primaries to prevent Trump from getting the Republican nomination. And I said, what are you talking about? Our system doesn't work that way. That's the Iranian system, where they have a guardian council and they cross the names off the list of people who can't run anymore. I said, you have to beat him competitively in the electoral process in front of the voters. And so, yeah, if people are doing things which we regard as detrimental to our democracy, we need to do better. We need to be able to use the media better. And we need to be able to explain why democracy is superior rather than trashing it, which is what we're doing now.
Okay, let's have a question from this side. Yes, in the second row.
So my question is to the entire panel. Since you're talking about media and despotism, how would you regard what is the role of social media in spreading despotism?
Okay, let's add one more question to that so we have a bit of choice.
Yeah.
No shouting's not going to get you anywhere in a democracy. Okay, the fifth row here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I
trying.
ask? Hello, excuse me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Whoever has the mic.
Yeah, I just want to ask, to what Dr. Tharoor said, does despotism really stem out of an individual personality or the mandate that is given by the people?
Okay, that's good. The biographer's question. Okay, Shashi first.
Well, on social media, I think in many ways social media is a protection against despotism because it's one place where your voice cannot be that easily stifled. In all fairness, the BJP used social media first because they felt their point of view wasn't adequately reflected in mainstream media. And then social media became their vehicle for which essentially led to their victory in the 2014 elections. Today, we in the opposition have found the virtues of the same thing, and I would say that many of you know I was kind of alone in that space for some time, and now everybody's in it because they realize the great value of being able to reach people without the mediation of an official approved so-called mainstream media, which has all the filters, either professional, fact-checking and so on, or otherwise. The danger, though, is that when you're risking a situation in which people might try and sell you lies, the absence of verification in social media itself can actually undermine your democratic freedoms, because you could be sold lies. It may not be in the controlled way that Ms. Lee described for North Korea. It may be in a kind of 1,000 flowers blooming ways, but if the 1,000 flowers involve 990 lies and people have no idea which 10 are not lies, you can end up being completely misled. So that's another great danger. But by and large, social media represents an alternative outlet.
Right. My question to Dr. Tharoor, who's obviously a very avid student of history, here, to left. Throughout history, and I'm finding the discussion very, very one-sided on despotism is bad, authoritarianism is bad, there's so much of terror in authoritarian states.
What's your question?
My question is, throughout history, we've had golden periods when a benevolent despot has taken charge, linked people to the vision, had execution strategy, etc.
Okay.
Is that the future
Benevolent
that beckons
despots.
us?
Okay,
A benevolent despot?
let's add some questions from the back of the hall. If we can have the mics going to the back of the hall. And let's try and also have some younger voices. Yes, there's somebody just here. Great, thank you.
Hello. This question is for Dr. Tharoor. So, why does your party celebrate and not vigorously condemn one of India's biggest despots, Indira Gandhi?
Okay, the Indira Gandhi question. Let's have another question. Yes, so the front row, the woman in the front row in the red. No, hang on, we got somebody here.
This might be a broad question, but shouldn't a little piece of paper called the Constitution protect us from despotism?
Sorry, say that again?
So shouldn't our little piece of paper, the Constitution, protect us from despotism?
Okay.
And also give us better rights to speak in our opinions and...
All right, so India has the longest bit of paper in the world
And that's the
protecting
US.
our rights. Who would like to answer? Rajni, do you want to answer this first? Do you want to take the IG question as well?
Well, I think, look, let's be fair to Indira Gandhi as well. Indira Gandhi imposed the emergency, but Indira Gandhi lifted the emergency as well. And she had absolutely no reason to do that in 1977. So I think let's be fair to all Indian despots. All Indian despots are in the end constrained by democracy. That at the end of the day, Indian despots have to go through an electoral system. I don't know what exactly one means by a benevolent despot in that context, but certainly despots in general in India will have to face the voter every 5 years, and so did Indira Gandhi. So for all Mrs. Gandhi's ills, and there were many, I think let's give her also credit for the fact that she did eventually lift the emergency in 77 with no obvious pressure at the time to do so. The Constitution, I think, is an interesting question, because I think, you know, we turn to the Constitution as if it is some kind of an answer to all our ailments, that, you know, there is the Constitution. But the fact is we have a first-rate Constitution that is often run by third-rate people. And that's not my quote, that's Nani Palkhiwala many years ago. And that's probably true. What's the use of a first-rate Constitution if the people who are mandated to ensure that that Constitution and its values are enshrined in the way we function are actually third-rate? And somewhere I think that disjunction must come to light. We have people today who consciously want to subvert the media, want to consciously subvert the courts, want to consciously subvert the bureaucracy, and we are going to say, no, but we have such a fine Constitution, it's going to get you nowhere. And even the electoral system, which very quickly, if I may say so, the fact that you know, what do despots say? But the people actually voted me in. Does that justify riots? Does that justify coming to power over the blood of people? In my view, no.
Ladies and gentlemen, final 2 minutes left. So
Okay,
this should be very quick.
So, Stephen, do you want to just touch on the thing of the Constitution, long or short?
I'm going to take benevolent despotism,
Okay, great.
which is a lie. If you look inside the despotism, it's lawless. There's runaway corruption. Moreover, despotic systems without transparency make mistake after mistake after mistake because there's no transparency and accountability. In a democracy, we see the stupidity every day, so-called third-rate people. In a despotism, it's hidden behind propaganda and lies. There is no such thing as benevolent despotism in reality.
Okay, we're going to take one quick question
Patrick,
from you here.
since those three questions were addressed to me, I'll give a one-sentence answer.
You can answer this. We'll just bring in this question here, yeah. No, this lady here. Oh, no, this lady's, okay.
One final question.
Yeah.
So,
Really sorry, but we're running out of time. This will be the final question.
We'll take it as a putative question. Shashi, we'll give you the last word.
So this whole panel just resonated me, the whole idea of 1984 by George Orwell. So that whole thing was kind of how despotism works, how the whole kind of historicism and other things are working. In our country right now, like giving out private information to the government is happening the same way. So my question is, like if democracy is somewhere like coinciding with the whole idea of despotism, so where are we heading towards?
Okay, Shashi, quick answer.
No, well, let me, since those three questions were addressed to me, give one-sentence answers. Number one, on the benevolent dictatorship idea, I agree with Stephen's answer, so I'll simply endorse it. Except to add, I think what you have in mind is something like the Lee Kuan Yew experience in Singapore. A lot of Indians seem to think that's the kind of model to follow. It can't work in a country that's 200 times the size of Singapore to begin with, but we can have a conversation about it. Stephen's answer covers it. You will have corruption, you will have misuse of power, you will have arbitrariness, and you will not be able to know about it. Therefore, it doesn't work. On Indira Gandhi, she had 11 years as Prime Minister. You're judging her by 22 months of that. The fact is that I was not a fan of the emergency. I've written against it at the time and later, but I will say that the very people who say you mustn't judge Mr. Modi just by 2002 should not be saying you should judge Indira Gandhi only by 1975.